Your Brand podcast. And this week, I wanted to share with you basically a little bit of a talk that I gave at an event last week. So I was taking part in an event called Collective Power, and it took part at St. Bride's Foundation in London, which, if you've never been, go check it out. It's amazing. It has this incredible library. It does letterpress workshops. If you like anything to do with type and ephemera, you are going to love this place. I actually did a letterpress workshop there like years ago, maybe like 12 years ago, when I worked just down the road from it, which was very cool. So it was really nice to be invited back there to give a talk. And basically there were 5 different speakers all speaking about their collections, and everyone had these really incredible, beautiful collections, like an amazing book collection, a sticker collection, type collection, yeah, all sorts. It was really, really cool. And I was invited to speak about my podcast as an audio collection, which I had never really thought of my podcast as a collection before, but actually it was such a cool way to think about it. And I was sort of reflecting back on all of the people that I've interviewed. So I worked out that I'd interviewed 158 people. I mean, it's probably more now. But I've interviewed 158 people. There's been 217 episodes of the podcast, I think, at this point. And I realized that I have amassed this big collection of advice, of guidance from all of these different people. And it was really cool to reflect on it in that way. And so what I did was I shared 5 moments from the podcast that have changed my brain chemistry. And so I want to share them with you today, because they are those things that whenever I think about the podcast, like these lessons have just like wormed their way into my brain, and I think about them so often. So that's what this solo episode is going to be today, highlighting these 5 lessons. I think I might turn this into a series because I chose 5 lessons for that talk, but honestly, there are so many memorable conversations from the podcast where I have learned something that has changed the way I think about my creativity, my business, how I navigate the world, all sorts of things, really kind of like deep stuff. So let's dive in with these first 5 lessons and we'll see if I turn it into a series. Okay, so first up, we have the episode that I recorded with Kyle T. Webster. Now, Kyle is an incredible illustrator. He's, worked with a kind of like dream list of clients. And he also created his own business called Kyle's Brushes, where he designed and created Photoshop brushes that other creatives and illustrators could use. And then he sold those brushes. They could import them into their Photoshop and they could use them in their illustrations. And he, grew a really big and loyal customer base for his business. And at some point he thought, wouldn't it be cool if I sold my business to Adobe? Because then the brushes would be integrated directly into Adobe Photoshop. So he found the right person to pitch to at Adobe, and he pitched his company to them. And ultimately, they said no. So I think they really liked the idea, but they turned down his pitch. They decided they didn't want to buy the company. And I think probably, maybe not so much now, but in the past, I would have been a very petty person and I would have been like, oh, well, if Adobe don't want me, I don't want Adobe. They're dead to me kind of vibes. But that was not Kyle's attitude at all. And he went away. He, grew his customer base even more. He was very strategic. He sent his brushes to like people who worked at like Disney and Pixar and even other people that worked at Adobe. And then he went back and he pitched again. And again, they said no. And again, he didn't stop. He went away and he grew his business even more. He grew his customer base. I guess he had more information about what Adobe were looking for in terms of like purchasing a company. And he learned those lessons and he improved his business. And then he went back a 3rd time and pitched it to them. And they said yes. And he sold his company to Adobe. And then he worked at Adobe for many years designing more Photoshop brushes for them. And all of those brushes were in Photoshop. I think they were even in Adobe Fresco as well, which is really cool. And I just love that story. Like that story has stuck with me so much because if you listen to this podcast, that I love talking about rejection. I love talking about this idea of like failure and trying to turn it on its head. And I think so often like we have such a negative feeling about getting a no, getting a rejection, but it's just useful useful information. And Kyle just took that as useful information and he didn't let it stop him and he kept going back and, you know, he pitched again and again. And so the real lesson that I learned from that is that like, no isn't the end of the story. Sometimes it's just the beginning of the story. And I think if we can get into that headspace and that attitude, it can change everything. I think so often I don't pitch for things because I feel like if I get a no, like that's it. Even, you know, even the prospect of the opportunity is gone, but that isn't true. You can pitch for things. And if you get a no, you learn from that and you go and pitch again. Okay, moment number 2 from the podcast was my conversation with Lois Seiko and Hannah Eisted. So they've both been on the podcast a couple of times, and we had a conversation all about success and what that looks like, but also fear of success. And I think that it's kind of more obvious to us when we fear failure, but I think we don't talk as much about fear of success. And so we had a really kind of deep and vulnerable conversation about that and what that looked like for us. And what was really interesting for me about that conversation is that as we were talking, I feel like my eyes were being opened to more and more areas where I was like, oh, I can see that there's a fear of success here. And I don't think I've necessarily worked through all of those things, but even just that sort of like recognition and that kind of revelation has really changed how I think about things. And one example of how this sort of shows up for me is I've got this belief in my head that if my business becomes too big or too successful, that I won't have enough time to spend with my kids. And like that's something that's really, really important to me. And I think I have this fear of like my business running away from me if it got too successful. I'm forgetting that I'm actually in control and I actually get to make, you know, decisions. But I think that is genuinely really holding me back because I'm like, well, I don't want to be in a situation where I can't spend time with my kids and I don't have any choice about it. So that one was an interesting one for me to think about and to unpick. But yeah, I would really recommend listening to that episode and sort of challenging yourself on what fear of success might look like for you and where it might be showing up. You know, like what are those things that you believe that probably aren't true? In the episode, Hannah really challenged me on some of the aspects of my fear of success and just challenge whether those beliefs that I had were actually true. So that was really helpful. So yeah, the lesson was definitely that it's sometimes not a fear of failure that's holding us back. It's sometimes a fear of success. My next lesson is from Sophie Cliff, and this is actually from years ago now. It was the first time I interviewed her. She's been on the podcast twice, and she just said this one phrase that literally lodged itself in my brain and I've thought about ever since. And she said, the word should is the killer of joy. And ever since she's said that, I've become sort of hyper aware of when I use the word should or when I hear other people using it as well. And I think we hear so many shoulds. Like, I just think about the content that I see online, you know, oh, I should be marketing my business this way. I should be doing this to promote my business. I should add this service to my business. You know, there's just all these things that we think that we should do. And when I think about them, I do literally think about them with a bit of a sort of sigh. It's like, oh, I should do this. I should do that. And it really is, it does suck the joy out of it. And I think there's this sort of real belief that we need to look at what everybody else is doing and we should be doing the same instead of looking at what everybody else is doing and actually using that as an opportunity to do something totally different and something that's more aligned for us. But I've also caught myself saying it myself to other people. Like even the other day, one of my friends was telling me about something to do with this business and I was like, oh, you should do this. And what I've started to do is I'm trying to change it from you should to you could. You could do this. It is a very different feel and it just feels so much better. Like you could. It's just one of many options instead of, oh, you should do this. Like even just that small switch in how I use words, it doesn't massively change the meaning, but it feels like it changes everything. So that phrase, yeah, really stuck with me. Should is the killer of joy. And I've taken that through in my business and it really like empowers me, I think, to catch myself when I start seeing what everyone else is doing and having that kind of like, oh, I should do this feeling. And then I can be like, oh, no, you know, I can see what's going on here. So that has been really, really helpful. My next lesson is from Kyra Matthews. This one actually is quite similar to the Kyle story, but Kyra has this brilliant attitude where she works with brands. So if you haven't come across Kyra, definitely go back and listen to her episode. But she sort of started out in the fashion industry. She then sort of pivoted and she was working with brands and doing lots of collaborations. She's now starting her own talent agency, which is very exciting. But basically, she goes into pitching to a brand hoping for an initial rejection or expecting an initial rejection, because if she gets that initial rejection, the conversation has started, and then she can get way more information from the brand about what they're actually looking for. So when she initially pitches, she doesn't know what the brand's goals are for that year, what their KPIs are, what they're trying to achieve. So she'll send off her pitch and then they might come back and be like, oh, this isn't quite right. But then she can go back and be like, can you tell me what it is you're looking for? And then she has all of this information that means that she can go back again with a second pitch that is perfectly tailored to what they're trying to achieve. And I just thought that that was such a brilliant way to look at it, expecting that initial rejection, almost wanting that initial rejection, because then you're armed with so much more information that you can then go and put together a much stronger pitch. So that was a brilliant lesson for me. And again, obviously I love it because it's all tied into rejection and sort of really changing how we think about rejection and failure. And then my final and fifth lesson came from Rich Webster, another favorite episode of mine. And actually the lesson that I want to share was just kind of a very small bit at the end. It wasn't necessarily what we were talking about in the whole episode, but Rich's whole thing is about how to work less. So he was a designer, he grew a big agency, and for him, like, his real focus was on processes and how he ran things and sort of making really smart decisions so that he could like not have to work loads of hours every day. And he did that very effectively to the point that other people wanted him to start teaching them how to do the same. And so he set this signature course, which I've taken, all about how to work less. Anyway, we were having this conversation, and at the end he was telling me about his journaling practice and how that had impacted him and his business and how it really helped him. And I was really inspired by that. And I immediately, in classic Liz fashion, was like, I'm going to start a journaling practice. And so I said that. And then Rich firmly, like nicely but firmly, challenged me and said to me, what are you going to give up, Liz, in order to start a journaling habit, like a daily journaling habit? And that question like really hit me, because I am the sort of person who just likes to collect hobbies. I just like to keep adding things onto my plate. I like experimenting, trying different things. So there's always more that I want to be doing. And I tend to just keep adding things, not taking anything away until I feel incredibly overwhelmed. And so I was really challenged by that. And it actually took me months to be willing to let go of something and to make space for it. And this year I have started doing my daily journaling habit. It's been incredible already. I'm using this really amazing tool called 750 Words, which another podcast guest, Laura Belgray, recommended to me. And yeah, I finally managed to let go of something. I let go of my course, Design Your Own Branding, last year. It's something that I really struggle with, but it's an important lesson that I'm going to take with me to this year, because I do need to just stop adding more and more and more to my plate, and I need to let go of things. Even like with this YouTube channel that I'm sort of posting on, I keep thinking, oh, I want to do 2 videos a week. Oh, I want to do this, I want to do that. And then I keep having to remind myself, okay, well, what are you going to let go of to make that possible? So yeah, that really challenged me. So the lesson really was, don't keep adding things. You need to take some things away. So those are my 5 key lessons from the podcast and from my guests. So let me just run through them. Kyle Webster's story: no is not the end of the story. My chat with Lois and Hannah: sometimes it's not a fear of failure, but a fear of success that is holding us back. My chat with Sophie Cliff: should is the killer of joy. My chat with Kyra Matthews: expect rejection because it's actually your biggest teacher and it gives you the information that you need to move forward. And then from Rich Webster: don't keep adding things, you need to take something away. Oh, such good lessons. I'm definitely going to turn this into a series. I'm going to do another episode where I share sort of 5 moments from the podcast that have really changed how I think about things. So I hope you enjoyed those lessons. Let me know if those are episodes that you have listened to and enjoyed. If not, I will have linked all of the episodes in the show notes or under the YouTube video, so you can go and enjoy those. And I'll be back next week with another solo episode. So thanks for joining me.